Cheers, guys. Epix911, welcome to the Elitist Geek and a video in the miscellaneous VR series. This one dealing with the state of virtual reality for me after 4 months of being an early adopter. So as most of you know, I received an HTC Vive at the beginning of May and my Rift sometime in late June. But altogether, I've had VR now for 4 months, and I did a 2-month update, but I've had a lot of you guys pepper me with questions about, not just my favorite games, but, do I regret VR? Has it worn off for me? Have I had any moments since that first HMD moment when I first put, the Vive on my head? So anyways, that's kind of what I want this video to be about. How are things at the 4-month mark? Well, let's get into it. So let's go with that last question, which is easily the question I get asked the most, and that is, has VR worn off for me? And the simple answer to that is, hell no. In fact, I was bringing my daughter to pick up a laptop for school today. We were driving to Best Buy, and she was telling me about Overwatch. She's a huge Overwatch player. Plays it with her friends, and how can you tell, eh? Daddy's girl, right? She's an awesome gamer. But anyways, so she's telling me about Overwatch, and of course I know about Overwatch, and I've tried a couple of games, but I still have yet to play a 2D game other than my 3DS since I've had virtual reality, right? Now, what you guys also know about me, anyone who's watched my videos for a while, is that I've got a pretty wide range of interests, but I've also been waiting for virtual reality for a hell of a long time. It's no joke when I say I've wanted VR since I was, 15 years old, because that is when I saw Star Trek: The Next Generation, Wesley Crusher, and the holodeck, and I was smitten. That was it, sold. From that day on, I was convinced not only would humanity have their own holodecks, right? But by the turn of the century, I was thinking, surely because Space Odyssey 2001, we've got moon bases already, we must have holodeck by then, right? Or at the very least, maybe way later when I'm an old guy in 2010, we'd have the holodeck by then. Unfortunately, that never came to pass. The most hopeful I'd gotten before this was the surge of VR popularity at the beginning of the 80s, right? Which was still when at the beginning of the 90s, when Star Trek: The Next Generation was still on. I believe the series ended in 1993. So I was hopeful. Wow, we were going in that direction. And then nothing. And you can imagine my disappointment, right? Of course, I had ever cracked to play World of Warcraft, StarCraft, Diablo. There was enough stuff to keep me busy, and a ton of anime and Japanese RPGs, which I had been too elitist to play up until the early 2000s. And let's just say I had enough to keep me busy, from Chrono Trigger to Final Fantasy VII and all points in between. So this time with virtual reality, there was no way in hell I wasn't going to not just get a VR solution, even before deciding I wanted them all for the channel. I was always going to buy them all no matter what. That's where I get obsessed about my hobbies, but again, this was a lifelong one. I don't buy golf clubs, all those other things. This was my expense. So did that. All right, well, answer the damn question, Epix. How is it 4 months later? Well, I said it at the start, just as enthusiastic. The evidence of not having played a 2D game is case in frickin' point on that. I've tried, guys. I really have. I've gone back to Dark Souls 3, tried to play it. I get generally about 5-10 minutes in, and I'm wanting an HMD on my head. Because that's a complaint you get from some people. Oh, you got to wear that on your head? Doesn't that detract from the gameplay? No, I'm okay with that. I'm so used to it now. I kind of feels strange. It kind of feels weird gaming without it, if that makes any sense at all. Like I said, uber nerdy, but that's me. That's why I talk about it on this channel with such passion, because that's what it is for me. So yeah, 4 months later, hell no. If anything, I am more stoked. Now, the other part of that question is, has anything been as exciting for you as when you put that HMD on your head for the first time? And the simple answer to that is also no. Nothing has beaten that first moment. That was absolute nirvana for me. It was just mind-blowing. And it ranks right up there with those pivotal moments in my life. Birth of my child, marriage day, all that kind of stuff. VR day, hell yeah. It was on. It was on from that point forward. And then the other questions. So let's kind of work our way down the list. What about games? What have been my favorite experiences so far on each platform? So let's get into that. Now, I don't have Gear VR in here for any of you Gear VR lovers, right? If that's the only thing you have, I apologize. I will do an updated on that. The simple truth of the matter is I got rid of my original one a week after getting it because I wanted to not only exchange my phone for a Note 7, but while at it, get the new Gear VR, the black one, because the white was starting to bother me. So I assure you there will be more Gear VR game-centric stuff coming up as I get a chance to play more. Well, let's start with the HTC Vive. So my 4 favorite experiences so far, and these are in no particular order, guys. First one, raw data. Raw data was probably the closest I got to a holy crap moment after putting the HTC Vive on my head for the first time. Because I had gone from literally cartoony style, and even Call of the Darkseid, right? It looks good, but it's still kind of leaning more towards that World of Warcraft cartoony look than it is the realism or uber sci-fi-ness of raw data. Raw data just blew me away, completely blew me away from the get-go, right? As soon as I started playing it. So raw data. Next would be the Solace project, which I keep wanting to go back to. I just don't have the time. So that's going to be a game I re-experienced this week. And yeah, I preferred it on the Vive because of the movement controls. Vanishing Realms, HTC Vive as well. Vanishing Realms showed me for the first time the potential of RPGs. It really got my imagination stoked. I was having trouble imagining what an RPG could be like, and RPGs are my favorite genre. Even though Vanishing Realms wasn't an amazing game in terms of, oh my god, mind-blowing, it did exactly what it needed to do. And it showed me that, hey, virtual reality RPGs can be awesome. Because, everything from the combat, it showed me what we can look forward to, even if it itself didn't deliver that. Next up, to round off the top 4, would be Wrath of the Fire God. What I love about that game is, yes, it's wave-based, just like raw data, but the two are so different from each other. VR has really revitalized a genre that, quite frankly, I gave zero craps about before this. The only wave shooters I ever do are on my arcade cabinet because that's the reality of what most of those games were, right? But I don't go out of my way with new games via Steam or monitor or consoles to play wave-based games. Wrath of the Fire God felt so awesome, so arcadey, and it is the perfect game for, look, I got 15, 20 minutes tops. You can jump in, you finish a level, and you jump out. Just awesome for that, and so immersive, and not a bad workout to boot. But, like I said, I much prefer games where I don't have to run around so much than the ones where I do. In this one, the gameplay is done in such a way that I don't mind. Like, it works for this game. It just works well. So what about the Rift side of things? Should be no surprise, the first one, but again, in no specific order, Damaged Core. Damaged Core, same idea. Again, so different from both Raw Data and Wrath of the Fire God. It's wave-based, but it hides it intelligently. And I know some of you have come forward and said, look, Epix, I can't stand, it's another one of those non-movement games. Yeah, it is. You're absolutely right. Can't dispute that. But it gives it originality. It does it with a twist. It uses that 1980s Paradroid, game component, game mechanism, whatever you want to call it, to really make it a strategic and tactical affair. You've always got to decide with a lot of pressure. It's almost like an active time battle based system to where are you going to jump next? Which droid are you going to take over? Taking over one that's maybe close to your objective but surrounded by other droids could be suicidal. Whereas something further back might not have the range, but you're more sound position-wise. So those are the aspects I like of it. Your mileage may vary, and fair enough. Like I said, it'd be a boring world if we all like the same stuff. Elite Dangerous, yep. Much preferred this on the Rift than the Vive. So Elite Dangerous, definitely. Eve Valkyrie, great arcade style when I just want to go and blast stuff for the Oculus Rift. And fourth, the Climb for just being refreshing and innovative. But with that said, it needs the Oculus Touch. If there was ever a game screaming for Oculus Touch, it would be The Climb. That's the only negative for me is the gamepad, which is great for some VR experiences, not good for that one. What about the worst game? I think most of you will know this one. Hands down, Cyber Threat. Now, the authors of the game have contacted me and told me that they've addressed the performance issues. And I was blunt with them. And I'm not out to hurt people's feelings, but I was really clear and adamant that the biggest detraction in that game, for me, the hugest negative was the fact it had no identity, no soul. Now, what's strange is how many positive comments that get. But exactly, like I just said, different strokes for different folks. A lot of people have, rated that game high. I have no clue what the hell they've been eating, but hey, opinions are going to vary. For me, it was absolutely terrible. The only game of 250 plus Steam games that I own that I have ever refunded. Ever. I've never refunded a game. Never had to until this one, Cyber Threat. How about my favorite peripherals? When I say peripherals, it can be control scheme. It can be an accessory, whatever. Just peripherals. So for me, the first, easily, this one, guys. Cytec X52 Pro. Hands down, the best peripheral in VR because, and here's the explanation on why, cockpit games are, by and large, the most natural fit for virtual reality, in my opinion. Sitting down in front with your HMD in a cockpit-style game is just a natural fit for VR. The game Elite Dangerous had its in-game graphics rendered with the Cytec X52 Pro as its model. So when you look down and see yourself, and it doesn't have to be the Cytec, but when you see yourself holding a throttle and stick, and in real life you're actually holding it, I can't begin to tell you what that does to enhance the immersion. But it's night and day from holding a gamepad or keyboard and mouse in Elite Dangerous. So Cytec would be number one. Just like I'm sure once I finally get a wheel again for some of the great VR racing games, I'm going to be really happy with the wheel because, again, it's such a natural fit for cockpit games. Next up would be the VR covers. You guys have seen them for my HTC Vive. I've done a video on those. I've got Rift ones underway. They have been fantastic. It's just made it that much more comfortable to wear these things. What about negatives? And I'm going to talk about negatives on both sides. All right? The negatives that I'm talking about right now concern both units. And these are in order of what kind of ticks me off. Let's talk about the first one. First one is foggy lenses. Granted, I live pretty close to the Pacific Ocean. It can get very humid here in Vancouver. Nothing like East Coast, Carolina, Florida, granted. But it can get pretty humid here. And the last 2 months, probably since July, with all the hot, humid weather, has been foggy lenses. Now, a couple of you pointed me to a link which has this spray. I just want to do a bit more research. Not that I don't believe you. I just don't want to be damaging my lenses if I don't have to. So I want to make sure this stuff doesn't damage them. Look into it. If it doesn't, I'm going to try it. So hopefully that addresses it. But when it's a humid day, almost always foggy lenses. And no, I know I mentioned that the VR covers seem to help with that. After more use, no, it's still as it was before. Maybe a little bit less, but it still happens far too often for me. And it can ruin a game because the fogging when it's bad, can start literally 30, 40 seconds into a game for me. Next up, cables. Cables are still a royal pain in the ass for me. Probably for most of you too. But it's the reality of the first wave of virtual reality, and we've all kind of grudgingly accepted it. It's a necessary evil. Now, with that said, I still have to order the damn new 3-in-1, which I will be doing for the Vive. Going to order that. But the fact of the matter is, we're still tethered into the experience, and it can destroy immersion a lot, especially when you're hop, skipping, and jumping and trying to avoid that horribly tangling Vive cable by your feet. Third would be better profile functionality, right? And some of it's just because the technology is so new, but there have to be better ways to store different varying configurations and setups that we, use. I want more than just one room VR setting. Allow me to save 5 or 6 with a little picture, thumbnail of what that configuration looks like. So if I want to reconfigure it exactly that way, because I've told you guys I use about four or five different configurations in here, depending on how I use the space, right? Because of stuff blocking, I can't just permanently mount them in 2 spots. It just wouldn't work. So having additional profiles with little thumbnails, it's like, oh yeah, setting 3, that's the one where I have the camera here and here. Great, set it up, pick that one, off I go. That is sorely needed, and it's also performance settings, not just play area, game settings. All of those things could benefit from enhanced profile creation and saving, in my opinion. Next up would be comfort. They're still not as comfortable as they need to be, both units. Even with the VR covers, you notice it after a few hours, right? And you need a break. And for me, a lot of that goes hand in hand with the fog or the just sweat. Having a bald head, I sweat a lot. It's one of the main reasons I wear this when I put my VR on, is because otherwise you get all the sweat just dripping all down your face, right? Which can absolutely ruin a gaming experience when you've got that dripping down. So that would be next up for me. And then lastly would be locomotion. Harped on this one till the cows come home. Every single VR game at minimum should have 2 forms of locomotion. Like Solus Project, you might not agree with the ones they chose, but at least they give you options. So if you're somebody who's susceptible to nausea, you've got another option. If you don't like teleport movement, like most of us don't, we've kind of been there, done that, we bought the t-shirts already, we want something new, we have another choice. So that would be that. Now, just some stuff in general that I've been asked. So it's come up a few times, like I say, the old at gunpoint, I would choose this one over that. But other than that, it's not a 1 and 2, it's a 1A and 1B. I've said that so many times here. But that's the truth. I love both of them. Both companies have pissed me off. HTC Vive, I've done videos on their horrible customer service. And the fact that only one executive seems to really care about customer service in that company, because we haven't, quite frankly, heard from anyone else other than Daniel. And Rift, supply chain issues, oh my God, they've had their fair share of stuff that's ticked us off, right? So despite all of that, because I'm such a nerd for virtual reality, I still love them both. And I'm sure my Sony PlayStation VR is going to be the third kind of child, right, that I like. And it'll be 1A, B, and C instead of 1, 2, 3. And I've said it earlier, but yeah, my enthusiasm has not waned. If anything, it's gotten, more intense as we're kind of approaching October 13th and the Sony launch. And then what about some positives for both units? Surely there's some positives, of course. There's tons of positives. The positives far, far, far outweigh the negatives, which is why I mentioned the negatives specifically. But if I'm talking about general positives, it would be I have seen enough innovation on all these different fronts, whether it's audio, locomotion, experience, tourism, medical, training, whatever the area. I've seen enough going on in parallel in virtual reality to make me confident that we're moving in the right direction. So that would definitely be a positive. Every day I do research for these news shows, I'm reassured we're on the right track, and that's a good feeling. And then the next positive is obviously, knock on wood, that both units are still functional. After the headaches I had after the first kind of 6 to 8 weeks, the last 2 months have been awesome. I've had no issues. Everything's been working good. I know for my Vive, a lot of it probably had to do with putting that Velcro on the top to ensure that the cables, there was no stress on those connectors. I'm convinced the damage to my old HMD was to one of those connectors, that there was just torque and it damaged it somehow. So that no matter what other cable I used, it just wouldn't work. It's the only thing I can think of, because it shouldn't have failed after 2 months. I doubt it was a lemon. I'm almost convinced it wasn't, even though I have no proof. But yeah, the fact that they're both still functional after 4 months, they damn well better be at that price, is awesome. All right, guys, there you have it. That's my 4-month virtual reality update. Hopefully you guys have found that informative. Let me know if you have any questions. Maybe I forgot to answer something. Hopefully I covered everything. As always, guys, cheers, and we will catch you on the VR flip side.